Starfleet has always promised a future worth reaching for. A future of exploration, diplomacy, and unity. But the ships that carried that promise, they were never just transport. They were tools, symbols, weapons, and warnings. Every hull tells a story of how the Federation saw itself, and what it feared becoming. In the beginning, ships were built to survive. Later, they were built to inspire, and eventually, to endure wars they were never meant to fight. From the experimental NX-01, cobbled together from desperation and ambition, to the Galaxy class, built for peace in a galaxy not ready to accept it, to the Inquiry class, born of fear and designed to never ask for permission. This is the evolution of Starfleet starships, a history written not in treaties, but in metal, in warp signatures, and in scars. And it begins, not in glory, but in war. Before Starfleet, before the Federation, there was war. The Romulan War wasn't just a conflict, it was a crisis that forced unlikely allies to come together or be conquered. The Romulans didn't show their faces. They didn't send diplomats. They sent weapons. Cloaked ships with plasma torpedoes that dissolved entire hulls before captains could even issue red alert. They didn't conquer territory, they erased it. The war didn't just test alliances. It reshaped the philosophies of the 4 founding worlds, and in doing so, it forged the foundation of what Starfleet would become. Each founding species approached the problem in their own way. The Vulcans, shaped by logic and centuries of cautious observation, built vessels designed to endure. Their ships prioritized scientific range and defensive shielding, minimalist design, efficient systems, slow but sustainable warp travel. Their answer to war was knowledge and shield harmonics. The Andorians, by contrast, believed in the strike. They had long been in conflict with the Vulcans, and their vessels reflected a warrior culture. Fast, maneuverable cruisers outfitted with high-yield particle cannons. Their strength was mobility and tactical aggression, a blunt doctrine: hit first, hit hard. The Tellarites, ever pragmatic and confrontational, built rugged workhorses. Their ships were heavy, modular, and redundantly reinforced. Shields were basic, but hulls were layered. Tellarite design wasn't elegant, but it could take a beating and keep fighting. They didn't outpace or outmaneuver threats, they outlasted them. And then came Earth. The NX class, and particularly the Enterprise NX-01, was humanity's first leap into interstellar diplomacy, and into danger. It was fast, ambitious, and underarmed. It had polarized hull plating instead of shields, grapplers instead of tractor beams, plasma cannons where others had phasers. But it had heart. It had intent. It had the first glimmer of what Starfleet would become. But the NX-01 was more than Earth's flag. It was a symbol of cooperation. As the war escalated, the NX class was retrofitted with Vulcan sensor packages, Andorian tactical software, and Tellarite structural enhancements. It became a hybrid, both literally and philosophically. And that mattered, because while the war with the Romulans raged in the shadows, another threat loomed just beyond: the Klingons. Unpredictable, territorial, and unrelenting. Their D5 battlecruisers were armed for conflict and operated on honor. They didn't hide. They challenged. Even early contact with the Klingons forced Starfleet to reconsider defensive layouts, shield configurations, and communications protocol. The result of these pressures wasn't just tactical evolution, it was ideological. Not in speeches or treaties, but in hulls and circuits. The Enterprise NX-01 wasn't just a ship, it was a question made manifest. Could a vessel be built not for domination, but for diplomacy? Not for territory, but for trust? And if so, what would it look like? It would look like the future. The war was over, the Federation was born, and for the first time in history, Starfleet had the chance to ask, not just how to survive, but how to serve. What followed wasn't peace through domination, it was peace through presence. Enter the Constitution class. Sleek, powerful, and balanced. These ships weren't designed for a single purpose, they were built to do everything. And they had to. The Federation was expanding, and its newest frontier wasn't a battlefield, it was the unknown. The USS Enterprise became the face of that mission. She carried phasers and photon torpedoes, but also medical labs, diplomatic suites, and vast science decks. A Constitution-class ship could defend a colony, host a treaty, study a supernova, and resupply a freighter, all on the same mission. This wasn't just a ship, it was policy made physical. Technology advanced across the board. Warp drives became more efficient and stable. Energy shielding replaced hull polarization. Universal translators made first contact less volatile. Transporters matured into reliable, life-saving systems. Phasers offered refined, non-lethal options, showed that strength didn't have to mean destruction. But beyond the systems and tech, there was something else at play. Identity. Starfleet captains weren't generals. They were mediators, troubleshooters, explorers. And that meant Constitution-class ships didn't just respond to threats, they prevented them. Because when one arrived in orbit, it didn't just bring help, it brought authority. Moral authority. The weight of an idealized federation. And more than that, it brought a message. When a Constitution-class ship dropped out of warp, it wasn't just a mission update. It was a statement. If one showed up, the Federation meant business. If multiple showed up, it meant that the Federation wasn't taking no for an answer. This was diplomacy backed by resolve, science backed by presence, exploration backed by phasers, shields, and a captain trained to do it all. Some worlds welcomed Starfleet, others challenged its presence, and still others, Klingon outposts, Romulan shadows, forced the Constitution class to shift from diplomacy to defense. But it could handle both. That was its genius. And the missions weren't clean. The outcomes weren't always just. But the Constitution class wasn't trying to be perfect. It was trying to be present. And that mattered. Because in the vacuum of deep space, presence is power. In time, the silhouette of the Constitution class became iconic. A saucer, a neck, and 2 nacelles. That was enough. Enough to say, we're here, we're listening, and we're ready. It was a starship. It was a symbol. It was a sheriff's badge in a lawless quadrant. The Constitution class had set the standard. But the galaxy didn't stand still. As the Federation expanded, so did its complications. New allies meant new tensions. Old enemies returned in unfamiliar ways. The Tomed incident severed communication with the Romulans for decades. The Klingon borders remained unstable. The Cardassian Union emerged as an increasingly aggressive neighbor. And in between, there were pirates, syndicates, and internal disputes that no amount of diplomacy could easily solve. Starfleet had to adapt. Enter the Excelsior class. Sleek, extended, and almost regal, the Excelsior was originally famous, or infamous, for being the first starship to answer transwarp drive. That failed, but the class itself didn't. What began as an experiment became a standard. Excelsior-class vessels were larger than their predecessors, with improved warp stability, enhanced shield redundancy, and more efficient energy distribution systems. They weren't designed to push boundaries, they were built to hold the line. These were the ships made to patrol borders, respond to emergencies, and serve for decades. And they did. Where the Constitution class symbolized idealism, the Excelsior symbolized endurance. In parallel, Starfleet had leaned into versatility with the Miranda class, smaller, modular, and built for efficiency. Mirandas were deployed everywhere, from planetary surveys to convoy escorts, to frontline reinforcements. They weren't glamorous, but they were reliable. The fleet was shifting towards scale, not spectacle. This wasn't the abandonment of Starfleet ideals. It was the realization that those ideals needed reinforcement. Phasers grew more precise, sensors more sensitive, hulls more modular, crews rotated more frequently. Vessels were now expected to remain in service longer, operate deeper into uncertain space, and deal with a wider range of missions, including ones with tactical consequences. Diplomacy was still the mission, but the path to diplomacy had gotten rougher. You didn't always beam down with a flag and a translator. Sometimes, you had to raise shields first. The Excelsior class reflected that reality. These ships weren't flashy. They weren't iconic, but they became the backbone of Starfleet's response to a shifting political and strategic landscape. Their longevity was their success. In time, the Excelsior earned a different kind of reverence. By the late 23rd and into the 24th century, it became the vessel of choice for admirals, not because it was the newest, but because it was trusted. A symbol of command, stability, experience. When an Excelsior-class ship appeared on sensors, it didn't just mean reinforcements had arrived. It meant leadership had too. This was a chapter in which the Federation didn't stumble, it adjusted. The technology improved, warp efficiency increased, shield banks became layered, tactical systems were integrated into standard design, not as a statement, but as a necessity. This wasn't a golden age. It was the beginning of Starfleet growing up. For a time, it felt like the Federation had won. The Romulans withdrew behind their borders, the Klingons signed peace accords, Cardassian aggression was contained. Starfleet found itself not in crisis, but in expansion. Colonies thrived, borders stabilized. Exploration, not war, once again became the central purpose of the fleet. It was an age of confidence, not reckless, but assured. The Golden Age. And its crown jewel was the Galaxy class. More than just a starship, it was a floating civilization, equipped for science, diplomacy, colonization, and even family life. Arboretums, classrooms, concert halls, these weren't just luxuries. They were philosophy made metal. The Galaxy class wasn't just a ship of the line. It was a statement, a promise that the Federation believed in its ideals so deeply it would embed them into every corridor and console. These ships were built not just to explore, but to impress. They were luxurious by Starfleet standards. Spacious living quarters, cultural exchange hubs, guest suites for dignitaries. Every detail was designed to woo civilizations, not intimidate them. And it worked. Entire planetary governments were brought into the Federation after first contact with the Galaxy class, not just because of its power, but because of the dignity it carried, because of how its crew treated others. The missions it undertook were vast in scope: long-range exploration, deep space science operations, diplomatic envoys, and cultural mediation. It was not uncommon for a Galaxy-class ship to serve as both scientific observer and ambassador in the same day. Even its officers reflected the era. Many of them believed that combat was a failure of diplomacy. They trained in psychology, xenolinguistics, anthropology. Starfleet had never been more prepared to talk before fighting, and never more convinced it would ever have to fight again. Onboard life reflected that optimism. Holodecks were used to explore the arts and history of member worlds. Crews debated philosophy in lounges. Children attended school in the same corridors where quantum field theory was tested. The Galaxy class wasn't just a place of work. It was a cultural bridge. Starfleet knew that presentation mattered, that in diplomacy, optics could be as powerful as shields. The sight of a Galaxy-class ship in orbit was not a threat, it was an invitation. But ideals are only as strong as the realities they face. Its massive size allowed it to do everything, but it also made it vulnerable. Its shields were advanced, but its hull, surprisingly fragile. Its mission profile was broad, but its battle readiness was stretched thin. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't supposed to be. But the galaxy wasn't always cooperative. The destruction of the Yamato, the sacrifice of the Odyssey, tragedies, yes, but also warnings. The Federation had built a monument to peace in a galaxy not ready for it. Still, that dream mattered. The Galaxy class became a symbol of what Starfleet wanted to be, and what it still hopes to become again. The Golden Age didn't end in ceremony. It ended in fire. The Dominion War wasn't just another conflict. It was a reckoning. Legacy ships, Mirandas, Excelsiors, even refitted Constitutions were pulled back into service, and one by one, they were destroyed. They were brave, but they were old. The Dominion exposed every weakness. Weapons that had once been cutting edge were now sluggish against phased polaron beams. Shield modulations couldn't keep up. Hull plating buckled under sustained fire. Even their warp cores were slower to cycle power between systems. Starfleet rushed to retrofit them, adding extra armor plating, jury-rigging shield harmonics, installing more powerful deflectors. Some ships even had their science labs removed to make room for torpedo magazines. But with every retrofit, something was lost. Their balance, their purpose, their grace. The Constitution class had once represented the Federation's frontier spirit. The Excelsior had symbolized stability. The Miranda had endured through adaptability. But war didn't care about legacy. These ships, once icons, became cannon fodder. Their silhouettes, once symbols of exploration and diplomacy, were now targets. And for many officers, that change felt like betrayal. To survive, Starfleet had to strip away the identity those ships once carried. Starfleet needed something new. The answer was the Defiant class. A ship made to combat the Borg would now defeat the Dominion. Small, powerful, purpose-built, it didn't carry diplomats. It didn't carry families. It carried torpedoes. Its pulse phasers were devastating at close range, capable of rapid, sustained fire that could outpace even Jem'Hadar attack ships. Combined with twin quantum torpedo launchers, the Defiant could cripple or destroy larger ships before they could respond. Its ablative armor wasn't just stronger plating, it dispersed energy across its surface, preventing hull breaches and reducing critical system damage. The ship's structural integrity field was layered, with redundancy built for prolonged engagements. It also featured reinforced shield geometry, allowing the vessel to withstand direct assault without needing to retreat. For a ship barely larger than a runabout, it was absurdly overpowered, and it had to be. It was built to survive what older ships could not. Its systems were so focused, so condensed, that early crews reported control sensitivity more akin to a fighter than a starship. But that precision made it lethal. Its warp core was overclocked, and its power systems heavily shunted to weapons and shields. There were no science labs. Not really. No diplomatic salons. No arboretums. Everything about the Defiant screamed one thing: get the job done. Win, survive, return. Alongside it came the Akura, the Steamrunner, the Sabre, the Norway. Ships designed for conflict, formed in urgency. Even the Sovereign class, born before the war, would find its role rewritten by it. Starfleet hadn't abandoned its ideals, but it had to armor them. And even in war, mercy endured. Captains still offered surrender. Medical ships still ran aid. But now, Starfleet once again had teeth, and it used them. The war ended, but the cost remained. Fleets decimated, allies shaken, worlds lost. Starfleet needed more than rebuilding, it needed reassurance. The Sovereign class, born on the edge of the war, became the Federation's new face. Streamlined, armed, intentional. No families, no luxurious lounges, no confusion about its role. The Enterprise E didn't need to announce itself. Its silhouette was enough. But it wasn't alone. The Prometheus class, with its multi-vector design, the refined Intrepid, still pushing science to the edge. Starfleet became a fleet of hybrids, diplomats with teeth. Even if these came from the Dominion War, they were defined in the post-war reconstruction. And behind their elegant hulls came power. The Sovereign class was equipped with multiple forward and aft quantum torpedo launchers, advanced phaser arrays, and multi-layer regenerative shielding. Its warp core, refined from lessons learned during the war, could push its sustained warp 9.9 speeds without compromising efficiency. It also featured bioneural circuitry, integrated targeting AI, and redundancy across critical systems to prevent battlefield disablement. Every deck, every corridor, was designed to survive and adapt. But for all its combat capability, the Sovereign class wasn't a hammer. It was a scalpel. Its bridge was calm. Its quarters were minimalist but livable. It wasn't completely built for comfort, but it didn't deny it either. Compared to the Defiant's austerity, the Sovereign class felt deliberate, controlled, centered. It was a ship designed to protect, not provoke, and that made its presence carry weight. It could chart a nebula, study a spatial anomaly, or host an interstellar summit. Make no mistake, while designed for combat, Sovereign-class ships were fully capable of performing the Federation's most ambitious scientific and diplomatic missions. But when trouble started, when negotiations failed or allies called for aid, it was the Sovereign class that Starfleet called first. The balance it struck between diplomacy and force projection made it the flagship of not just the fleet, but of the Federation's evolving identity. Warp was faster, shields were smarter, interfaces became instinctive. Even the crews changed. Officers trained for diplomacy were cross-certified in defense. This wasn't regression, it was redefinition. The Federation still stood for peace, but it no longer assumed it would be welcomed. Starfleet didn't abandon hope. It just stopped assuming it was enough. Hope survived, but something else grew in its shadow. The Federation emerged from war more cautious, more prepared, but also more afraid. Crisis followed crisis. The Romulans begged for help and were denied. A synth attack devastated Mars. Starfleet pulled back. The fleet changed too. Ships became more modular, sleeker, heavier, less poetic. Science vessels took on escort roles. Explorers were fitted with classified systems. And new ships, like the Inquiry class, were built with one question in mind. How fast can we respond with force? The Inquiry wasn't beautiful. It wasn't symbolic. It was designed for rapid deployment and overwhelming firepower. Where earlier ships represented ideals, these represented intent. And it was the cost of survival. But it came with a cost of its own. Fear became policy. Mistrust became standard operating procedure. Starfleet, once a beacon, became a shield. And sometimes, a sword. The uniforms changed. The missions changed. But the mission statement, that remained the same. We come in peace. We just don't wait to be fired on anymore.